It was just another Tuesday evening at the local McDonald's, the kind where the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple through the restaurant's wide windows. The smell of fresh fries and sizzling burgers filled the air as the dinner rush was starting to pick up. A young high school student walked in, his basketball jersey still damp from practice, with a gym bag slung over his shoulder. He'd been coming to this McDonald's ever since he was a kid. It was his favorite spot to grab dinner after practice, especially on days when his mom worked late shifts at the hospital. You could tell he was a good kid just by looking at him. His school books peeked out from his unzipped backpack, and an honor roll pin caught the light on his jacket. The type of student who'd rather spend his evenings studying than causing trouble. The restaurant staff knew him well. He always said, "Please," and "Thank you," and never failed to clean up his table before leaving. That evening, he ordered his usual, a Big Mac meal with extra fries and a chocolate shake. The cashier greeted him with a familiar smile, and he settled into his regular booth by the window. As he pulled out his physics textbook, planning to review for next week's test while enjoying his meal, he had no idea his whole world was about to turn upside down. The restaurant was bustling with its usual mix of families, teenagers, and people grabbing dinner after work. Kids were laughing in the play area. The ice cream machine was actually working for once, and the drive-through line wrapped around the building. Everything felt normal, peaceful even. He was halfway through his burger, occasionally glancing up from his textbook to watch people come and go, when he noticed a commotion near the counter. A customer was getting increasingly agitated, their voice rising above the regular restaurant chatter. "Someone took my phone," they were saying, panic evident in their voice. "I just put it down for a second to grab my order." The restaurant manager, a middle-aged woman who'd worked there for over a decade, tried to calm the situation. "Let's check the surrounding tables first," she suggested, her voice steady and professional. Sometimes phones slip between seats or fall under tables. But the customer wasn't having it. They were convinced someone had stolen their brand new phone, and they wanted action taken immediately. Other customers started looking around uncomfortably, some checking under their own tables, others pretending not to notice the growing tension. Our student kept his head down, focusing on his physics problems. He'd learned long ago that the best way to avoid trouble was to mind his own business. Besides, he had a big test coming up, and these equations weren't going to solve themselves. That's when things started to go wrong. Really wrong. The manager approached his table, her usual friendly demeanor replaced with an uncertain expression. "Excuse me," she said, her voice slightly trembling, "but would you mind if we checked your bags? Someone's phone is missing, and we're asking everyone in this section." The student looked up, confused. He hadn't moved from his spot since sitting down, something the security cameras could easily prove. His food wrapper and receipt were still on his tray, his books spread out across the table. He'd been so absorbed in his studies, he barely noticed anything happening around him. Little did he know that this ordinary evening, this routine dinner stop, would become the starting point of something much bigger than himself. Something that would not only change his life, but would spark a conversation that needed to happen in their quiet suburban community. As he sat there, watching the manager fidget nervously with her name tag, he couldn't have known that within hours his story would spread across social media like wildfire. He couldn't have guessed that his simple trip to McDonald's would soon become a catalyst for change, pushing people to confront their own biases and assumptions. But for now, in this moment, he was just a hungry teenager who wanted to finish his dinner and study for his physics test. Just a kid who'd chosen the wrong place at the wrong time, about to learn how quickly an ordinary evening could become extraordinary. Everything happened so fast after that. The restaurant manager hadn't even finished speaking when the front doors swung open, and 2 police officers walked in. Someone had called them without even checking the security cameras, or giving the situation a chance to resolve itself. The bright overhead lights of McDonald's seemed to grow harsher as the officers made their way through the restaurant. Conversations died down, and the only sounds were the beeping of the fryers in the kitchen and the muffled giggles of kids in the play area. too young to understand the tension filling the room. The student's hands started trembling slightly as he closed his physics textbook. He'd never been in trouble before, not even a detention. His mind raced back to all the talks his parents had given him about how to act around police officers. Sit straight. Keep your hands visible. Speak clearly. Stay calm. Stand up, please, one of the officers said, not unkindly, but with an authority that left no room for discussion. The student slowly rose from his seat, aware that every eye in the restaurant was now fixed on him. Some people had their phones out, recording everything. Others looked away, uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. A woman sitting nearby spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. "He's been sitting there the whole time," she said. "I've been here for the past hour. He never left his seat." The officer barely acknowledged her, focused instead on the task at hand. "I didn't take anything," the student said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You can check the security cameras. I've just been studying and eating my dinner." He gestured toward his half-eaten burger and scattered schoolwork, evidence of an ordinary evening turned nightmare. But things were already in motion. The missing phone's owner was pointing at him, saying they were pretty sure they'd seen someone matching his description near their table earlier. Never mind that the student had walked straight to his usual booth when he arrived, that multiple witnesses could confirm this, that the security footage would show the truth. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked around his wrists right there in the middle of McDonald's, right next to the booth where he'd spent countless evenings studying. His physics notes scattered across the floor as the officers led him away from the table. Someone's drink had spilled in all the commotion, the brown liquid seeping into his abandoned schoolwork. In the midst of all this chaos, nobody noticed the real phone thief quietly slipping out the side door. Nobody saw them pocketing the phone they'd opportunistically swiped when its owner was distracted. They disappeared into the evening, leaving behind a situation that would soon spiral far beyond a simple case of mistaken identity. As the officers escorted the student toward the door, more customers started speaking up. The elderly man who always read his newspaper in the corner booth stood up, saying this wasn't right. A group of college students who'd been studying nearby pulled out their phones, making sure to record everything. The restaurant's young cashier, who'd served the student countless times before, tried to tell the officers about his regular visits after basketball practice. But their voices seemed distant, drowned out by the sound of blood rushing in the student's ears. Through the windows, he could see red and blue lights painting the parking lot in alternating colors. There were more police cars now, 3 in total, for a missing phone, for an innocent kid who just wanted to study and eat his dinner. As they approached the police car, he caught his reflection in the window, still in his basketball jersey, honor roll pin glinting under the parking lot lights. In that moment, he realized this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about to become something much bigger, something that would make people question their assumptions and biases. He could hear more phones recording, more voices being raised in protest. Social media would soon be flooded with videos of this moment, sparking outrage and conversations about racial profiling in their supposedly progressive suburban community. But right now, all he could think about was how he was going to explain this to his mom. The back door of the police car opened, and as he ducked his head to get in, he caught one last glimpse of the McDonald's where he'd spent so many peaceful evenings. He couldn't have known then that this moment of injustice would become a catalyst for change, not just in their community, but for many others facing similar situations across the country. By sunrise the next morning, the videos of the McDonald's incident had spread like wildfire across social media. People who'd never even heard of our small suburban town were sharing the footage, adding their own stories of similar experiences, and demanding answers from local authorities. The high school hallways buzzed with whispers and worried conversations. Everyone had seen the videos. Their classmate, still in his basketball jersey, being led away in handcuffs over a phone he never took. The school principal watched the growing crowd of news vans gathering outside the building from his office window, knowing he needed to address this situation head-on. During morning announcements, his voice carried through every classroom, steady and clear. What happened last night to one of our students reflects a larger issue we cannot ignore. Today, we stand together as a school community. The usual morning chatter fell silent as students and teachers alike listened intently. The basketball coach called an emergency team meeting in the gym where they practiced just yesterday afternoon. The team sat on the bleachers, many still wearing their Team Unity wristbands from last season. "This isn't just about basketball anymore," the coach said, his voice echoing in the quiet gym. "This is about standing up for what's right." Local civil rights organizations didn't waste any time. By noon, their representatives were meeting with the students' family in their living room. The house that usually held just their small family was now filled with community leaders, all offering support and guidance. Their phones kept ringing. Journalists, lawyers, activists, all wanting to help tell this story. Outside, neighbors who'd lived on the same street for years, but barely spoke to each other, were now gathering in small groups, talking about organizing a community meeting. Mrs. Johnson from next door brought over a homemade casserole, saying simply, "Your family shouldn't have to worry about cooking right now." Small gestures of kindness began flowing in from all directions. The local church opened its doors for an emergency community forum. The pews filled quickly. Students, parents, teachers, and concerned citizens all crowded in. The air was thick with emotion as people stood up one by one to share their own experiences with prejudice and profiling. Stories that had been kept quiet for years finally found their voice. Back at McDonald's, something unexpected was happening. The employees who'd witnessed everything the night before had organized their own response. They pooled their tips to hire a sign language interpreter, ensuring their upcoming protest would be accessible to everyone in the community. The young cashier who'd always served the student created a student's welcome sign for the window. Social media continued to amplify the story. A local artist created a digital illustration of the incident that went viral. The image of a student's textbooks scattered across a restaurant floor became a powerful symbol. Hashtags demanding justice trended nationally, bringing attention to similar cases across the country. The student's teachers came together to create a study group, ensuring he wouldn't fall behind in his classes during this challenging time. His physics teacher personally delivered his homework, along with a note that read, "Your education matters. Don't let this stop you." The gesture brought tears to his mother's eyes. The local coffee shop, just down the street from McDonald's, became an unofficial headquarters for community organizing. People would stop by throughout the day, picking up Stand for Justice buttons and signing up for various support initiatives. The owner, an elderly man who'd lived in the town his whole life, said he'd never seen the community so united. As evening approached on that first full day after the incident, a candlelight vigil was organized in the park across from the police station. The turnout surprised everyone. Hundreds of flickering lights filled the darkness, each flame representing a person who refused to let this injustice go unaddressed. Standing there in the gentle glow of countless candles, watching people from all walks of life come together, the student realized that something profound was happening. His personal nightmare was transforming into a movement for change. The community wasn't just demanding justice, they were demanding a fundamental shift in how people treat each other. The day ended with a powerful image. Local high school students had covered the sidewalk outside McDonald's with chalk art, filling it with messages of hope and calls for change. Among the colorful designs, someone had written in large letters, "This is not the end of the story. This is just the beginning." The truth came to light in the most unexpected way. 2 days after the incident, while the community was still organizing protests and support rallies, a young tech-savvy employee at McDonald's decided to review all the security footage one more time. But this time, they didn't just look at the cameras pointing at the students' table. They checked every single angle. The employees sat in the back office, eyes glued to the screen, rewinding and fast-forwarding through hours of footage. That's when they spotted something everyone had missed. In the corner of one frame, barely visible but unmistakable, was the moment the phone actually disappeared from its owner's table. The footage showed a completely different person, wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase, smoothly picking up the phone while pretending to reach for a napkin. This person had been sitting at the table next to the phone's owner, timing their move perfectly when the owner turned to grab their order from the counter. Within minutes, the restaurant manager was reviewing the footage. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone to call the police department. This was it, the evidence that would clear an innocent student's name. The same cameras that should have been checked before making any accusations now held the key to the truth. The phone's owner was called back to the restaurant to view the footage. As they watched the real theft unfold on screen, their face turned pale. I was so sure," they stammered, watching as their assumptions crumbled before their eyes. The weight of their mistake suddenly became very real. Social media exploded with the update. The same platforms that had shared videos of the wrongful arrest now spread the news of his innocence like wildfire. Screenshots from the security footage showing the real thief were everywhere, though people were careful not to start another witch hunt. The phone's owner, wrestling with guilt and shame, wrote a public apology that was posted online. "I made assumptions based on nothing but my own prejudices," they admitted. "I let fear and bias cloud my judgment, and an innocent young person paid the price for my mistake. I am deeply sorry." News vans returned to the town, this time to cover a different angle of the story. Local news anchors who'd initially reported on the theft now had to correct their narratives. The story was no longer just about a wrongful arrest. It had become a powerful lesson about the dangers of jumping to conclusions. The police department faced mounting pressure to explain their rushed response. Why hadn't they reviewed the security footage before making an arrest? Why had they so quickly acted on an unsubstantiated accusation? The chief of police called a press conference, but their prepared statements felt hollow in the face of such clear evidence. At the high school, the student's physics teacher used the incident as a powerful lesson. "In science, we never jump to conclusions without evidence," she told her class. "We observe, we gather data, we test our hypotheses." Imagine if we applied that same principle at night at McDonald's. The business-suited thief was eventually identified through the security footage, though this part of the story got less attention. They were a traveling salesperson who'd already left town, but local authorities were working with police in neighboring cities to track them down. The student's family gathered in their living room, watching the news coverage of the revealed truth. His mother held his hand tightly as they listened to the reporter detail how the evidence had been there all along, if only someone had taken the time to look for it. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when the McDonald's employee who found the footage spoke to a local reporter. "I just couldn't accept that we'd all failed this kid so badly," they said. "Sometimes the truth isn't hidden. We're just looking in the wrong direction." As the day ended, the students stood outside the same McDonald's where everything had happened. The chalk messages of support were still visible on the sidewalk, though starting to fade. But now they held a different meaning. They weren't just calls for justice anymore, but reminders of how truth can prevail when people care enough to look for it. The morning after the truth emerged, a sleek black car pulled up outside the student's house. Out stepped one of the city's most respected civil rights attorneys, her reputation for fighting injustice preceding her. She'd seen the viral videos and security footage and had driven 3 hours just to offer her services, free of charge. Sitting at the family's kitchen table, the attorney spread out documents while explaining their options in simple terms. "What happened to your son isn't just wrong," she said, stirring the cup of coffee his mother had made. "It's a clear violation of his civil rights." Her words carried weight, but her smile was kind and reassuring. The local NAACP chapter had already started organizing peaceful protests outside the police station. Their president, a retired schoolteacher who'd lived in the community for 40 years, knew exactly how to make their voices heard while keeping everything peaceful and legal. Every morning at 8 a.m. sharp, protesters would gather, holding signs with messages like, "Check the footage first," and "Prejudice has no place here." Word spread through the high school like a quiet storm. Students started planning something big, really big. The student body president, normally quiet and reserved, stood up during lunch period and announced their plan. Tomorrow, we walk out. Not just for our classmate, but for everyone who's ever been judged unfairly. The school administration could have fought against the walkout. Instead, they surprised everyone by working with the students to make it safe and meaningful. The principal himself helped coordinate with local police to ensure proper street closures and safety measures. Sometimes, he announced over the morning intercom, the greatest lessons happen outside the classroom. At exactly 10 a.m. the next day, hundreds of students walked out of their classes. The scene was powerful. Teenagers of all backgrounds, walking silently, many wearing their honor roll pins or sports jerseys. They carried handmade signs with thoughtful messages about justice and equality. Local news cameras captured it all, broadcasting the students' silent protest across the state. Back in the attorney's office, things were moving quickly. She'd assembled a team of lawyers who specialized in civil rights cases, all willing to work pro bono. They weren't just fighting for compensation. They were pushing for systemic changes in police procedures and training. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, witness statements, and cell phone videos painted a clear picture of that night at McDonald's. But what made this case special wasn't just the evidence. It was the community's response. The attorney had never seen such widespread support for a civil rights case in this suburban area. Local business owners started contributing to the legal fund, even though the attorneys weren't charging fees. It's for future cases. They'd say, for the next kid who might need help. The owner of the local bookstore set up a special display of civil rights literature, with all proceeds going to the legal fund. The students' basketball teammates showed up at every legal meeting, sitting quietly in the background, showing solidarity. Their presence reminded everyone that this wasn't just about legal arguments. It was about real people, real lives, real relationships. Support came from unexpected places, too. A group of retired police officers reached out, offering to testify about proper procedures and how they'd been ignored that night. Their involvement added crucial credibility to the case and showed that even law enforcement professionals recognized the need for change. The phone's owner, still wrestling with guilt over their false accusation, asked to meet with the family. In the attorney's office, they offered a tearful apology and agreed to make a formal statement supporting the legal action. It was a difficult meeting, but an important step toward healing and understanding. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the student kept attending classes, playing basketball, and maintaining his honor roll status. His quiet dignity in the face of injustice spoke volumes. "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else," he told his attorney, showing wisdom beyond his years. The case was becoming more than just a legal battle. It was turning into a movement for change. Other communities started reaching out, sharing similar stories, and asking for advice. The attorney recognized that this case could set important precedents for how police departments handle similar situations in the future. Change started with a simple email. The city council member who'd watched everything unfold from the sidelines finally spoke up. Emergency meeting. The message read, "This Thursday, we need to address what happened at McDonald's." Within hours, every council member had responded, "We'll be there." The City Hall's meeting room had never been so packed. People spilled out into the hallways, some standing for hours just to be part of this moment. The student and his family sat in the front row, surrounded by supporters. Even the high school principal had canceled his evening plans to attend. One by one, community members stepped up to the microphone. A retired police officer spoke about proper training protocols that had been ignored. The local teacher shared stories of her students' fears and concerns. The McDonald's employee who found the security footage explained how simple checks could have prevented everything. The police chief sat uncomfortably as body camera footage from that night played on the big screen. Everyone could see how quickly things had escalated, how little investigation had happened before the handcuffs came out. The chief's usual confidence was replaced with something that looked a lot like shame. We need more than just apologies, the student's mother said when it was her turn to speak. Her voice was quiet but firm. We need real change, not just promises, actual policies that will protect our children. The room erupted in applause, and several council members were seen nodding in agreement. That meeting lasted 6 hours. By the end, the council had drafted a list of immediate changes. First, all police officers would undergo new training focused on de-escalation and bias awareness. Second, a community oversight board would be created to review police actions. Third, new protocols would require thorough investigation before any arrests, especially involving young people. But the changes didn't stop there. The police department brought in experts to revamp their training programs. Officers spent days learning about implicit bias, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of building community trust. Some officers initially resisted, but seeing the security footage from McDonald's changed their minds. The local police academy updated its curriculum. New cadets would now spend time working with community organizations before getting their badges. They'd learn about the neighborhood's history, meet local families, and understand the importance of treating everyone with respect. A young officer who'd been on the force for just 2 years suggested creating youth advisory councils. We need to hear directly from young people, she said during a training session. They see things we might miss. The idea caught on quickly, and soon high school students were meeting regularly with police leadership. The McDonald's franchise owner didn't wait for corporate approval to make changes. They installed better security cameras, created clear procedures for handling complaints, and trained staff on de-escalation techniques. We serve everyone. The new sign in their window read, "Everyone deserves respect." Other businesses in town started following their lead. The mall updated its security policies. The movie theater trained its staff to handle conflicts better. Even the local library revised its rules about when to call police versus handling situations internally. The student's story became part of the police department's training materials, not just locally, but in neighboring cities too. Officers would watch the security footage, then learn about all the different ways the situation could have been handled better. This is what we're trying to prevent, trainers would say. This is why we're here. At the high school, a new course was added to the curriculum: community relations and civil rights. The student who'd been wrongly arrested was invited to speak to the first class. He talked about fear, forgiveness, and the importance of standing up for what's right. 6 months after that first city council meeting, the changes were already showing results. Complaints against police officers had dropped significantly. More importantly, people reported feeling safer, more trusted, more respected by law enforcement. The city council member who'd called that first emergency meeting smiled as she reviewed the progress reports. Sometimes, she told a local reporter, it takes a wake-up call to remind us who we're really serving. This community didn't just wake up. It stood up, spoke up, and showed up to make real change happen. Sometimes the biggest changes start in the smallest places. For our student, it began in the corner of the school library during lunch break. A few classmates had asked him about that night at McDonald's, and instead of brushing them off, he decided to share his story. His voice was quiet but steady as he described how it felt to be handcuffed for something he didn't do. That small gathering grew larger each day. Soon, students were bringing their lunches to the library just to be part of the conversation. They shared their own experiences with prejudice, their fears, their hopes for change. The librarian, seeing what was happening, started setting up extra chairs without being asked. The students' grades never dropped, even with everything going on. If anything, he studied harder. They tried to make me feel small, he told his physics teacher one day after class. But I won't let them stop me from achieving my goals. His latest test score, a perfect A, proved his point. One morning, during a school assembly, he surprised everyone by walking up to the microphone. Public speaking had never been his thing, but something had changed. We need to talk about what happened, he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. Not just my story, but all the stories that never make the news. That speech led to the creation of a new student group, Youth Voices for Change. What started as 5 students meeting in the library grew into 50, then 100. They organized workshops on knowing your rights, understanding bias, and speaking up against injustice. Other schools in the district started asking how they could create similar groups. The basketball court became more than just a place to play. During breaks between games, the team would talk about their experiences with prejudice and brainstorm ways to make their community better. The coach noticed how his players weren't just becoming better athletes, they were becoming better leaders. Local middle school teachers started inviting the student to speak to their classes. He'd tell his story, but he always focused on hope rather than anger. It's not about blaming people, he'd explain. It's about making sure we all do better. The younger students would hang on his every word, asking thoughtful questions long after the bell rang. His academic performance caught the attention of college recruiters. But they weren't just interested in his grades, they were impressed by how he'd handled adversity. One admissions officer put it simply, "We're not just looking for smart students, we're looking for people who can change the world." The local newspaper asked him to write a weekly column about youth perspectives on community issues. His first article, titled "More Than What Happened at McDonald's," got more online shares than any other story that month. He wrote about everyday experiences, challenges, and hopes, things that made people think differently about their own assumptions. His mother noticed the changes in him too. The quiet boy who used to keep to himself now spoke up at family gatherings, sharing ideas about community involvement and social change. "He's still my baby," she told a friend, wiping away proud tears, "but he's also becoming a leader." Even the incident's hardest moments became teaching tools. When speaking to groups, he'd describe how it felt to be wrongly accused, but he'd always end with how the community came together afterward. "One bad moment doesn't have to define us," became his signature message. It's what we do next that matters. At basketball games, opposing teams started asking to meet with him after matches. What began as curiosity about the McDonald's kid turned into meaningful conversations about making change in their own communities. The rivalry on the court never stopped, but something bigger was happening in those post-game talks. His physics grades stayed strong through it all. "Science teaches us to question everything," he'd say during his talks. To look for evidence, to think critically, to not jump to conclusions. That lesson from his favorite subject became a powerful metaphor for fighting prejudice. As the school year progressed, he maintained his spot on the honor roll while leading his new advocacy group, playing basketball, and speaking at community events. Some people asked if it was too much, but he just smiled. "This isn't a burden," he'd say. "This is my purpose." The email arrived at McDonald's corporate headquarters on a Tuesday morning. Attached was the viral video of the incident, along with a simple message from the franchise owner: "We need to do better." Within hours, the email had reached the company's highest levels, and a team was assembled to address what had happened. The corporate response team landed in town the following day. They weren't there just to manage public relations. They wanted to understand how one of their restaurants had become the setting for such an unsettling incident. Their first stop wasn't the restaurant, but the student's home. Sitting in the family's living room, the corporate executives listened more than they spoke. The student's mother served them her homemade lemonade while her son explained how a simple dinner after basketball practice had turned into a life-changing event. No press, no cameras, just honest conversation about what went wrong and how to fix it. "We're not here to defend what happened," the head of operations said, setting down her untouched lemonade. "We're here to learn from it." She pulled out a notebook and started writing as the family shared their thoughts on how things could have been handled differently. Back at the restaurant, every employee was interviewed, from the evening shift manager to the newest crew member. The young worker who found the security footage became a key advisor in developing new protocols. "Sometimes the youngest voices have the wisest solutions," the corporate team leader noted. The changes started small but meaningful. New training videos were created, featuring real scenarios and clear guidelines for handling complaints. Every McDonald's employee across the country would watch these videos, learning how bias can affect decision-making and how to prevent snap judgments. The company didn't stop at training. They launched a nationwide initiative called Welcome to All, installing better security systems in every restaurant and creating clear procedures for handling disputes. The students' story became a case study in their management training program, teaching future leaders how to avoid similar mistakes. Local franchise owners from other chains started reaching out, asking how they could implement similar changes. The ripple effect spread through the fast food industry. Other major restaurants began reviewing their own policies, realizing they weren't immune to the same problems. The McDonald's where it all happened underwent a complete transformation. The manager who had been there that night worked with corporate to redesign the restaurant's layout, making it more open and community-friendly. They added a student corner with better lighting and power outlets for studying. The message was clear. Everyone was truly welcome. Corporate headquarters didn't just focus on policies. They invested in people. They created a scholarship program for high school students with a focus on promoting understanding and equality. The first recipient, a student who wanted to study law and civil rights, though it wasn't the same student from the incident. The franchise owner became an unexpected advocate for change. At a national convention of McDonald's owners, they shared their experience, challenging others to examine their own biases and procedures. It's not enough to say we serve everyone, they declared. We need to show it in our actions. The company's social media team handled things differently too. Instead of defensive corporate statements, they shared real stories of community building happening in their restaurants. They highlighted employees who went above and beyond to make everyone feel welcome, creating a new standard for corporate responsibility. Monthly community meetings began taking place in the restaurant's newly renovated dining room. Police officers, students, teachers, and residents would gather to discuss local issues over free coffee and fries. The Golden Arches became a symbol not just of fast food, but of community healing. As winter turned to spring, the restaurant installed a new sign above its door. More than a restaurant, a community space. The student who'd been wrongly arrested was invited to cut the ribbon at the ceremony. Standing there, he smiled at how a place that had been the scene of such injustice had become a center for positive change. The corporate team's final report didn't just gather dust on a shelf in headquarters. It became a blueprint for change, shared with other businesses facing similar challenges. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us where we need to grow, the report concluded. But it's what we do after the crisis that defines us. The email arrived at McDonald's corporate headquarters on a Tuesday morning. Attached was the viral video of the incident, along with a simple message from the franchise owner. We need to do better. Within hours, the email had reached the company's highest levels, and a team was assembled to address what had happened. The corporate response team landed in town the following day. They weren't there just to manage public relations. They wanted to understand how one of their restaurants had become the setting for such an unsettling incident. Their first stop wasn't the restaurant, but the student's home. Sitting in the family's living room, the corporate executives listened more than they spoke. The student's mother served them her homemade lemonade, while her son explained how a simple dinner after basketball practice had turned into a life-changing event. No press, no cameras, just honest conversation about what went wrong and how to fix it. We're not here to defend what happened, the head of operations said, setting down her untouched lemonade. We're here to learn from it. She pulled out a notebook and started writing as the family shared their thoughts on how things could have been handled differently. Back at the restaurant, every employee was interviewed, from the evening shift manager to the newest crew member. The young worker who found the security footage became a key advisor in developing new protocols. Sometimes, the youngest voices have the wisest solutions, the corporate team leader noted. The changes started small but meaningful. New training videos were created, featuring real scenarios and clear guidelines for handling complaints. Every McDonald's employee across the country would watch these videos, learning how bias can affect decision-making and how to prevent snap judgments. The company didn't stop at training. They launched a nationwide initiative called Welcome to All, installing better security systems in every restaurant and creating clear procedures for handling disputes. The student's story became a case study in their management training program, teaching future leaders how to avoid similar mistakes. Local franchise owners from other chains started reaching out, asking how they could implement similar changes. The ripple effect spread through the fast food industry. Other major restaurants began reviewing their own policies, realizing they weren't immune to the same problems. The McDonald's, where it all happened, underwent a complete transformation. The manager who had been there that night worked with corporate to redesign the restaurant's layout, making it more open and community-friendly. They added a student corner with better lighting and power outlets for studying. The message was clear. Everyone was truly welcome. Corporate headquarters didn't just focus on policies. They invested in people. They created a scholarship program for high school students with a focus on promoting understanding and equality. The first recipient, a student who wanted to study law and civil rights, though it wasn't the same student from the incident. The franchise owner became an unexpected advocate for change. At a national convention of McDonald's owners, they shared their experience, challenging others to examine their own biases and procedures. It's not enough to say we serve everyone, they declared. We need to show it in our actions. The company's social media team handled things differently too. Instead of defensive corporate statements, they shared real stories of community building happening in their restaurants. They highlighted employees who went above and beyond to make everyone feel welcome, creating a new standard for corporate responsibility. Monthly community meetings began taking place in the restaurant's newly renovated dining room. Police officers, students, teachers, and residents would gather to discuss local issues over free coffee and fries. The Golden Arches became a symbol not just of fast food, but of community healing. As winter turned to spring, the restaurant installed a new sign above its door. More than a restaurant, a community space. The student who'd been wrongly arrested was invited to cut the ribbon at the ceremony. Standing there, he smiled at how a place that had been the scene of such injustice had become a center for positive change. The corporate team's final report didn't just gather dust on a shelf in headquarters. It became a blueprint for change, shared with other businesses facing similar challenges. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us where we need to grow, the report concluded, but it's what we do after the crisis that defines us.